Hi, and welcome to Art World. I'm your host, Diana Meyer. We're here in Los Angeles at Joseph Brenner's residence. He is the cultural administrator for the Man Ray Trust. What kind of a man was he?
Well, he was a short fellow, as I remember, about 5'5", maybe 5'6", the most. And he was casually dressed. He spoke in a fairly slow manner. I thought he had a slight Brooklyn accent, but maybe not. Very, very normal person. When he spoke, he spoke thoughtfully. But there was always sort of a twinkle in his eye and a little twist in what he would say to you or say to me.
The exhibition Ray The Bazaar Years is an attempt to take the work of this sort of classic avant-garde artist and contextualize it with the work that he did as a commercial artist. And it was not for Man Ray an activity, that being his commercial activity. It wasn't an activity that was a small part of what he did. There was a 20-year period from 1920 to 1940 where he was really making his living doing commercial photography, most specifically doing fashion photography. So the exhibition runs in a chronological form, and it begins with early work that he had done in New York City when he had met the French artist Marcel Duchamp, and this a perfume bottle which has a photograph, in fact, of Marcel Duchamp as dressed as a woman, his alter ego, Rose C'est la Vie, and obviously this kind of referent to the notion of consumerism and promoting yourself as an artist and so forth and so on. It's interesting that Man Ray goes in 1921. He leaves New York City where his aesthetic and his activities were less appreciated than they would be in Europe, and he moves to Paris. And very quickly in the first year that he is in Paris, he begins to work for the House of Poiret, the most important fashion house of the time. And as he is making, in fact, these photographs in his dark room, he accidentally turns the light on. He's got photographic paper in a tray and stumbles across the fact that obviously if you turn light on in a dark room, it exposes the paper, and comes up with what he referred to as rayographs. And the rayographs very quickly were picked up specifically by Vanity Fair, and you can see here an edition of 4 of them that were run in the magazine in the year of 1922. So basically, within 6 or 8 months of actually having discovered this, which would be one of his most important tools as a photographic artist, they're run in the mass media in America. And what that obviously begins to do is promote his reputation through the mass media. And there is sort of the crux of the exhibition as we kind of follow the development of his career through the mass media.
So
you know, what we're talking about is a period of time when mass market publications were relatively new, and in fact the general public was extremely enthusiastic about them. And we're talking about publications like Vanity Fair and French Vogue and Harper's Bazaar, which were not how should I say it, the way that we think of them now, meaning that they were tailored for a very sophisticated, high-level audience. Doesn't mean to say they weren't mass-market magazines. They were. And it was also a time when, again, the artistic community was very excited about the idea of being able to disseminate their work through this process. And it was something where, I mean, obviously there was no television, there was very little radio, and this was really a major way in which the artists could get their work out to the world. It's pretty great, isn't it?
Yeah.
Don't trip. The other thing that we tried to bring out was we tried to bring out how certain motifs which were specific to surrealism then began to be integrated very quickly by Man Ray into his commercial work. So you have photographs, a combination of photographs that he did as artworks and that he did as commercial work, and then obviously this, a magazine, where you've got a kind of combination of multiple uses of the hand as a motif. And interestingly, this one particularly is hands, the gloves are painted on the hands by Picasso. And then what you also see is that he was very happy to use the motifs that were important in his own artwork within the commercial context, so that again, this photograph entitled The Lovers, which is a photograph of his lover's lips, Lee Miller, a photograph of her lips, which became the basis of a painting called Observatory Time, The Lovers, which we see in the background of this photograph that was used in Harper's Bazaar in an editorial on this specific dress. So he didn't really have he freely took from his high-level artwork and incorporated it into the kinds of commercial work that he did. In 1940, when Man Ray leaves Paris because of the war and settles in Hollywood, he gets in his new automobile and he goes out and he tries to find old copies of the magazines, because he realizes he has himself none of the original images. They've been given to the magazines for reproduction. The magazines keep them in their files, and then the artist loses them. Unfortunately, most of this work is lost because the magazines eventually would simply discard them. At any rate, Man Ray goes out and he tries to get back issues of the magazine so he can set up his own little sort of tear sheet file, which in fact is what most of these tear sheets, these images that you see in the exhibition, are drawn from Man Ray's personal collection. And he noted with some pleasure that a lot of his work had in fact been torn out of the magazines, and he assumed then that that was done by students, and he took that to mean then that he really had succeeded in producing work that went beyond the kind of transitory quality that was typical of magazine work at the time. If you think of maybe Andy Warhol, Man Ray is not, it wouldn't be wrong to say that Man Ray in some way was the precursor of Andy Warhol. In 1940 he returned to America and settled in Hollywood. Part of his concern each time was that he set his life up such that he would have a studio, he would have a woman, and he would have an automobile, and indeed those priorities were priorities that he was always able to meet. He wasn't always able, however, to move his paintings and his sculpture and his films and the other artwork that he was doing when he left. And it's important to remember that he was a maker of objects, a filmmaker, a painter, and as well as a photographer, and really thought of himself primarily as a painter. So there was this constant process throughout his life of kind of reinventing himself and regenerating himself. And I think part of that is the reason that working in mass market magazines was acceptable to him, because the notion of the sort of reproducible image in infinite numbers was something that was akin to his own sense of his own artwork and the kind of work that he did. In the end, finally, he began to feel that his reputation as a fashion photographer was eclipsing his reputation as a painter, and that he gave up fashion photography for that very reason, so that he really could dedicate himself to the pursuit of his own painting and not have to worry about the kinds of conflict that his reputation as a fashion photographer would create for him.